Okay, so chapter 2 is titled The Chemistry of Life. So in this chapter, we're going to learn the components of the body at the atomical level, and we're going to understand also how these tiny molecules start forming the different parts of the human body. So we're going to describe the structure of an atom. We're going to see the components of an atom, or of atoms, which are protons, neutrons, and electrons. We're going to see what are the major elements that forms the different cells and tissues in our body. And then we're going to differentiate what is an element versus an atom versus a molecule. We're going to see what are isotopes, what they are used for. We're going to distinguish between mixtures and chemical compounds. We're going to compare and contrast the different types of chemical bonds. And we're going to focus more in the most common ones, which are ionic and covalent. And we're going to see how they contribute to form larger molecules. We are also going to see some examples of chemical notations, what they mean. And then we're going to see the process of making energy, how do we use it, and how does that apply to homeostasis. And we're going to see different chemical reactions like synthesis, decomposition, exchange, and we're going to see the role of enzymes in metabolic reactions, how they help us to perform certain functions in our bodies, and how the lack of them can lead to problems in health. Okay, so let's get started. So, matter is anything that has a mass and occupies a space. Matter has different states, has solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. And everything, it is composed of matter. Living and non-living organisms are made of matter. So, we have a unit for measuring the amount of matter that is called mass. And it's not the same as weight. So matter is measured in physiology in grams and kilograms. And matter is made out of different components, the elements that we have, and they will have chemical properties and physical properties. Now, chemistry, it's a branch of science that is in charge of studying the changes in matter, the chemical changes. So basically, how these elements interact with each other, how they can form or break bonds. And it is essential to understand chemistry for understanding health, because many of the functions of our body, of course, are related to this chemical reaction that happens in our body. So then, the smallest unit that retains the chemical properties, it will be the atoms. So atoms, they have a central part that's called the nucleus, where you have protons and neutrons. So protons and neutrons are subcomponents of the atoms, and they have a mass. And that mass is measured in atomic mass units. Each of them, they have a little bit over 1 AMU, or atomic mass unit. Protons, they have a positive charge, while neutrons, they don't have a charge. And then we have around the nucleus of the atoms orbits, which are surrounded by electrons. Electrons are the smallest parts of an atom, and they have a negative charge. And the mass of electrons is so small that it's neglectable. So we don't use that mass to calculate the weight of elements. We only use the mass coming from protons and neutrons to calculate the atomic mass unit. Sorry, the weight of an element. So atoms, they build elements. So here we have the periodic table, and then at least in here, you can see 118 elements. And an element has only one single type of atom. And that atom will have different numbers of protons and neutrons, and then you will put them in the right order in the periodic table, and then you will calculate the mass of this element by adding the number of protons and neutrons. So, most of the elements are not pure in nature. They are always most of the times in combination with other elements. And when you have different atoms combining, they will form a molecule. Now, some molecules can be made out of the same element, but some molecules can be made out of different elements. And a molecule is defined as two or more atoms chemically bonded together. In the case of elemental oxygen, it's a gas. You have two oxygens bound together. It's O2. So that's an example of a molecule with atoms of the same element. Now, sometimes you can have a heterogeneous molecule in which you have two different elements. Like in the case of water, you have two hydrogen molecules and one oxygen, and they form a molecule of water. So, in this case, a compound, which is a molecule containing atoms from different elements, it will have unique properties different from their individual elements. It's like sometimes with certain friendships. Some people might be shy when they're alone, but when they are with the best companionship, they become a different person. They are wild. If I look at some people, it's not because I believe that you are that type of people. So I tend to scan, guys, to see if you're paying attention. But yeah, some people, they transform when they are with different companionship. So anyway, like for instance, these two, hydrogen and oxygen, when they are alone, they are gases, right? But when you combine them in that proportion, they will become what? A liquid. So all compounds are molecules, but not all the molecules are compounds. So now, for the specific details of the components of an atom. So protons, again, they have a positive charge. So it can be put like P with a plus sign on the right upper area, that's the superscript. And this is the mass. It's around 1.008 atomic mass units, which will be equivalent to 1.67 times to 10 to the minus 24 of a gram. So it's a very small amount in grams. And then where is located? In the nucleus of the atom. The neutrons are abbreviated N0 with a superscript 0, and it has no charge, so it's neutral. It doesn't have electrical charge. The atomic mass unit is slightly larger than the one of the protons, so it's 1.009, and it's just like as the protons is located in the nucleus. Now, the electrons, which will be abbreviated with lowercase e, and then with a negative or just like a little hyphen superscript on the top, it has a negative charge, and look at the mass. It's 1 to over 1836 of a proton, or 9.11 times 10 to the 28 grams. So when it comes to calculating the weight of an element, we don't take into account the number of electrons, just protons and neutrons. And this one is always circling the nucleus, because in the nucleus you have the positive charge, and in physics, positive charge attracts negative charges, and vice versa. Negative attracts positive. Positive to positive charges repel, negative to negative charges repel. So that's the law of the opposite attracts. So here is the structure of this atom. So this is a carbon atom. Here's the nucleus. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 protons, and then you have 6 electrons. 6 neutrons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then here we have the orbits or electron shells. In the first orbit, atoms always fit 2 electrons. And then here, because we have the same number of electrons as the same number of protons, which is 6, we will fit in the next orbit 4 electrons, but this one can fit up to 8. So then the atoms in general, whenever they have the same number of protons and electrons, makes them electrically neutral. So here is the number of electrons that each of these shells can hold. First, 2 electrons, second 8, third 8, fourth can hold 32, fifth shell up to 50. And these electrons in the outer shell, depending on how many shells these elements have, but these ones will be the ones that are capable of reacting with other atoms. And the reason for this is because they are exposed. Some elements, like the inert gases, which are found in this column of the periodic table, they have filled their outer shell with electrons. So they are not so reactive. That's why they're called inert gases. Inert is something dead. And depending on the number of electrons that you have in this outer shell is whether you share them or if you donate them. So that's how we form the different molecules and the different chemical bonds between the elements, by sharing electrons, donating electrons, or accepting electrons, but always with the outer shell. So how do you organize the elements? Well, each element is defined by an atomic number, which is equal to the number of protons in its atoms. So the elements are organized in the periodic table by increasing atomic number. So here is the atomic number of each of these. So if you look at carbon, number 6 is number 6. So how many protons it has? 6. What about hydrogen? I was going to say helium. It's here. Helium, how many? 2, right? And then gold, this one, 79. Silver, 47. Cadmium, 48. So that's the atomic number, and that represents the number of protons. So the chemical symbol, it can be 1 or 2 letters. And the first letter is in capital, the second one is not. And there are 92 naturally occurring elements, and 25 are essential for life. So we have here all of these abbreviations. Some of them, they come from the place where they were discovered, the last name of the person who discovered the element, and some of them, they come from Latin names, like sodium, Na, natrium, which means salt. Ag is argentum, which is basically the Latin for silver. Aurum for gold. So they have a meaning, they have kind of an origin. So that's basically the name of the element. And now for the ones that are basically most common for human life or for physiology. So we have hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. So they make 96% of the components of our body. And these are major elements. Now we have mineral elements that makes less than 4%, which will be sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. And then we have here some that are classified non-metals. So this staircase pattern in here separates the non-metals from the metals. So the metals are on the left, the non-metals are on the right. And here we have phosphorus, selenium, and chloride. So these are mineral elements. And now we have trace elements that can be metal or non-metals that basically, this is sulfur, sorry, that they are trace elements because they make less than 0.01%. So we have here, for instance, vanadium, chromium, magnesium, iron, cobalt, nickel, copper, zinc, molybdenum, strontium, iodide, selenium. But the main ones will be for us that we see a lot in the different components of the cells will be carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and then phosphorus. In our bones, we have, of course, a lot of calcium. We also have magnesium. And then many functions of the nervous system and the skeletal muscle cells, which will be basically transferring electrical signals that we know as action potentials happen because we have exchange of ions like potassium, sodium, and chloride. Once they become an ion, these are elements. So we will see that in just a bit. So, our human body is made out of atoms of those different elements that we saw, and these atoms combine to form the molecules. The 4 major macromolecules that we have will be carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Carbohydrates provides energy. Our neurons, our muscle cells, our cells in general, but especially our neurons, they like glucose a lot. Glucose is an easily breakable chemical structure that can provide energy so our cells will function. Glucose is part of the carbohydrates. And then we have the proteins that makes most of the different cells and parts of our body. Our tissues are made mostly out of proteins. So they form the bulk of our body. And not only they build the structures, but also they perform several functions like the enzymes. Enzymes are proteins. And enzymes are catalyzers, so it helps to speed up the chemical reactions. Sometimes you might have seen in a friend or a family member, like you maybe have to go to have a trip, or maybe you have to go to a party or something. And for instance, if it's your family, it will be the first person who is in the car and is honking, hurry up, that's the catalyzer. So proteins are enzymes, catalyzers, increases the speed of chemical reactions. And lipids or fats are used for several functions, including signaling, for storage of energy, for cushioning. So it forms cell membranes. So we have different functions for lipids or fats. And then nucleic acids like DNA provides, or deoxyribonucleic acid provides the instructions for our cells to perform a function. Unless you basically cook a lot of, or you prepare certain meal a lot of the times, and then you know the recipe by hand, you don't need the instructions. But most of us, we need instructions to make a dish, and in this case, for our cells to perform a function or to form a structure, we need the instructions from DNA. And then RNA, we have three types. We have transfer, we have messenger RNA, and we have ribosomal RNA. So that's how you write it down, like the abbreviation transfer, messenger, and RNA. So they have different functions. So this one brings some subunits from proteins that are called amino acids, so that the code of the DNA is read by the cells, so you can make proteins. And then the messenger RNA actually brings the code of whatever the DNA is telling the cells to do. And then ribosomal RNA, it is found in the factories of proteins in our cells, which will be found freely in the cytoplasm or attached to an organelle that is called rough endoplasmic reticulum. But those ribosomes, they form like a little gap like this, and then the messenger RNA, which is kind of a string, runs through it, and then you start adding the amino acids, and then you have an exiting protein. So you code and transmit genetic information with these nucleic acids. So atoms from carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen combine to form proteins, water, etc. And then these molecules make up the organelles. We will see in the cell chapter what are these organelles, what is the function, but one of the organelles is the mitochondria. The mitochondria is specialized in making a molecule of energy that we call ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So this ATP, it helps us to drive some chemical reactions. And then several organelles like mitochondria, nucleus, rough endoplasmic reticulum, vacuoles, smooth endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus make up the cells. And the cells are the basic unit of life. So the cells are capable of producing specific functions as a whole, as a unit, just like as the atoms. The atoms, if you disintegrate an atom, it will lose its properties, which is combining with other atoms to form molecules. So if you were separating different parts of the cells, well, the cell won't function as a unit. It's like tearing apart a car, so it won't help you to go from one place to another. And then the units of life, which are the cells, group together and form tissues. A tissue is a group of 3 or more different types of cells. And 2 or 3 types of tissues make up an organ, like a heart, like a lung. And then these organs, they form individual organ systems, like the cardiovascular system, like the respiratory system. And all of these systems, like the 11 ones that we saw in the previous chapter, they form the entire organism. Now, within certain elements, there are certain atoms that has different number of neutrons. When they have this different number of neutrons, the nucleus of this element become unstable. And it will emit energy particles until it reaches stability. And for some, it will take years for this stability to come into place. And these variants of elements where we have different number of neutrons are called isotopes. And these isotopes have a value. Some of them, they can be used to calculate the age of an artifact in nature. And some of them, they can be used medically to treat cancer or other problems. So, here we have examples of isotopes of hydrogen. So we have this common type of hydrogen that is called protium, in which we have 1 proton and no neutron. Now, there is one type that is called deuterium. This one has 1 proton and 1 neutron. This is a stable isotope that is used in research. And then we have another one, it's called tritium, that it has 1 proton, but it has 2 neutrons. And this is radioactive and can be used in fusion. The H-bomb was made out of this. Now, for carbon, we also have isotopes. So we have carbon-12, which is the most common type, in which you have 6 protons and 6 neutrons. And then we have carbon-14, in which we have 8 neutrons instead of 6. And then we have 6 protons. Now the atomic mass unit of each of these will be added, and then you calculate the mass of these elements, which is found in there, in this. So, if you look at hydrogen, for instance, look at the mass, it's 1.1, 1.01. Why is not 1? Well, it's because you will have variations in nature where you might have certain percentage, although this is the most common one, certain percentage in which you have deuterium, and another one where you can find this tritium. And then you calculate the average of all of these elements, and then you put it in here. So, we are all isotopes in this room. And then if we were about to calculate our atomic mass unit, and that will be calculated in pounds, let's say. Well, we will have a range of each of us, like we all are elements of anatomy and physiology. That's the element name, anatomy and physiology. And then we will have a group of people that weighs like around 120, 130 pounds. And then we have another group that might weigh between 130 and 180 pounds, and some that weighs over 180 pounds. And we wanted to calculate the average. The average is going to go towards where we will find more of those isotopes. The group that weighs between 120 and 130 pounds, or the group that weighs between 130 and 180, or the group that weighs over 180. So basically, that's why in some of these we don't have a specific zero numbers in the ending. Okay, so it's the average rather than the majority. So you may have heard about carbon-14, how it is used to calculate archaeological samples. So then these radioisotopes will be the ones that emit detectable radiation and can be used to treat diseases. Like sometimes some people might have like an overactive thyroid gland, and it's a specific nodule in the thyroid gland, which we have it here on the sides of the neck. And this thyroid gland, guys, is used for secreting hormones that increases our metabolism. So some people might have very overactive thyroid gland, and the person has very high heart rate, which is one of the signs of hyperthyroidism. The person will be irritable, and it's always hot, and the person will be very thin because he has high metabolism. In this case, you can kill that nodule or these cells in the nodule by adding radioactive iodine into the person's body. And then that will be absorbed by the thyroid gland, and then at the end of certain days, this overactive tissue will be gone. And of course, when this happens, don't think like the person will have radioactive iodine in its body and can go freely in the population and walk. No, because that radiation is emitted to the environment, and that can affect others. So you quarantine the person for a certain number of days until the radiation is gone. So that's the use of these radioisotopes. Now, sometimes can be used Sorry, I said before to treat cancer. No, it's not used to treat cancer. It's used to detect cancer. So basically, someone may have an active mitotic group of cells in the brain, like you might have a tumor in the brain, a cancerous tumor, and then you can give radioactive glucose to the person. And since cancer cells, all they do is divide without purpose, and of course they use a lot of glucose, they can take up more of this radioisotope labeled glucose, and you can see it in something that is called PET scan. PET scan stands for positron emitting tomography. It's not like a PET. Right? No, it's not. This is a fancy imaging study. It's not found in many cities. It has to be a large city, it has to have a large hospital, specialized trained personnel. Anytime that a radiologist uses, or someone, a technician uses this type of studies, they have to take care of also of their body, because that can affect their health if they don't use like some sort of aprons that protect them from this radiation, or some neck gaiters that they use. So they have to take care of their body as well when they use these techniques. So then you can see with these radioisotopes what is going on in their body non-invasively. And the type of iodine specifically that is used to treat hyperthyroidism is iodide 131. That's the radioisotope. So see, this is the average of iodide, 126.90, but there are some that will be 131. Any questions about radioisotopes or anything that we have seen so far?
So like what radiation does you treat cancer? Is it treatment for cancer like radiation? What type of radiation is that? Like is there
What type of radiation it is used in to treat cancer? Well, that's X-rays, but a higher level. I will tell you something after the recording. My thing there about radiation in treatment of cancer. So then mixtures. Mixtures is the combination of two or more substances physically combined. They're not chemically combined, they're physically combined. And then when you separate these two by physical means, they retain their individual properties. So example of a mixture in our body will be blood. It's a mixture of cells and plasma, which is a liquid, and the cells are solid in a way. Usual life example, sand and water. It's a mixture, physical combination. And then 4 chemical compounds. So in this case will be substances that chemically combine of different elements. And they have unique properties different from their elements. So once you have a chemical combination, at the point of no return, they behave differently. And these chemical compounds cannot be separated by physical means. Examples will be of chemical compounds, water and carbon dioxide. So we have 3 types of mixtures. We have suspensions, colloids, and solutions. Suspensions are large, visible molecules that can settle out Like, for instance, if you take a sample of blood, put in a test tube, you don't use an anticoagulant, and then you let it sit there for a few minutes, the red blood cells by gravity tend to go into the bottom, and the plasma, which is a liquid and is less heavy than the cells, it stays on the top. So physically they separate, like this colloid. Sorry, this suspension. And then a colloid is where the small particles are found in the suspension or in the mixture, and they're not visible. So, for instance, the cytoplasm, and they don't settle, they don't physically separate. And then solutions will be mixtures in which you have even smaller molecules that can be dissolved uniformly. Like, for instance, glucose solution, in which you have water with, like, if it's a 5%, so you add 5% of glucose. It's weight volume. Whatever volume you have, you add 5% of that. Like if you have 100 milliliters, you will add 5 grams of water to make it 5%. And then difference between solvent and solute. Solvent will be the substance that dissolves another. Typically it's a liquid. An example will be water. And a solute will be the substance dissolving the solvent. Typically it's solid. It can be glucose, it can be a salt, sodium chloride. Coffee, when you put it in water. So here is the different examples of mixtures. So here's the suspension, tested with blood, physically separate, the molecules are large, the red blood cells settle out, and the liquid portion, the plasma, stays on the top. Colloid, 2 distinct components, particles small and non-visible, like milk, and you keep it in suspension. A solution will be when the particles are extremely small and they're not visible, they don't settle out. Once the component dissolves, like in this case will be glucose molecules dissolving water, they remain in the solution. They don't precipitate or fall out of the solution. Now, in science, we have a unit that helps us to measure the concentration of a solute in a solution. And that unit is called molarity, or molar. And you abbreviate it with capital letter M. So, this helps us to know what is the concentration then of these molecules. And this molarity is typically expressed as moles, or MOL with lowercase, divided by L, which is for liters. So moles per liter. And then 1 mole equals 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd. This will be the unit of 1 mole. And it can be a mole of atoms, molecules, or ions in a substance. This number, 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd, is Avogadro's number. So that was the physicist who described this number. Be 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd. Avogadros. So, when you have a substance and you say, well, it's a substance that has 1 molar or 1 mole, that means that you have in that container atoms that makes this number, 6.022 times 10 to the 33rd. And it's a large number. Or it can be a molecule or it can be an ion. Like can be hydrochloric acid solution, 1 molar. So it has 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd molecules of hydrogen, of hydrochloric acid or HCl. So a million, it's a million. It can be pesos, it can be dollars, it can be yens, it can be crowns. And when someone reaches that million, becomes a millionaire. So it's like Avogadro's number. Whenever you have 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd of an atom in a solution, then that makes it 1 molar. I'm a millionaire. Can you believe that? And I have dollars.
You share some to the poor.
Hmm?
You share some to the poor.
I have 1 times 10 to the 6th dollars. That makes me a millionaire. You want to ask me what type of dollars they are? Monopoly money. Still. Can be funny money, right? Anyway, so molarity then is used to quantify substances in the body like electrolytes, glucose, or gases dissolving body fluids. So why it matters? Well, because we regulate homeostasis with sensors that detect, which are called osmoreceptors, that detects the osmolarity of our plasma. So we have in our plasma between 275 to 295 milliosmoles per kilogram. So basically a milliosmole is 1,000 of a molar. And a kilogram, it's a unit of weight in the metric system that is more or less equivalent to 2.2 pounds. So, now, in the outer shell of the atoms, then we have, sometimes in some atoms, we have these extra electrons that do not form the complete group of that orbital that are available for chemical reaction. So these are called valence electrons, and they are found in the valence shell. So when an electron fulfills, in the case whenever they have more than 1 orbit or 1 shell, when it fulfills 8 in number, which is the octet rule, it will become stable. It won't combine with others anymore. So then if it doesn't have the full 8, it can gain electrons, lose electrons, or share the electrons. But it's trying to basically fulfill the octet rule, which will be having 8 electrons in its outer shell. And again, it will be for those ones who will have more than 1 shell. Because in the first shell, we always have 2. So then, depending on the number of electrons is whether this type of atoms can combine easily or not. And with whom? It's not as easy as, well, I can combine with everything. Now, carbon itself, it's an element that, because it has only four electrons in its outer shell, it can make combination with other molecules, like with hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, etc. And it can form not only like molecules in our body, but everywhere. Like it can combine with other carbon atoms and it can form diamonds in nature. Okay? So then, what are these different types of chemical bonds that you can form? Well, one of these will be ionic bonds. In ionic bonds, you transfer electrons from one element to the other. And one can gain electrons, and the other one can lose electrons. And then, after you transfer these electrons, you create ions. Ions are So these are electrically charged molecules that results from the transfer of electrons between elements. And these ions are subdivided into two. So the one that has positive charge, the ion that has a positive charge, is going to be a cation. The one that has a negative charge is going to be an anion. In the case of carbon, because it has half of the electrons that fits in its orbit, that makes it easier for this carbon to form chemical bonds with other elements. And in the case of sodium chloride, which is the typical salt that we ingest to make our food to taste better, we have two elements. We have sodium and we have chlorine. And then when you dissolve that in water, in the case for our body, the water that we have in the saliva, or if you dissolve it in food, then these two elements separate sodium from chlorine. And then sodium and chlorine will be hydrated with water, and then they will form ions. Sodium will become positive, so it's going to be a sodium ion, and chlorine is going to be called chloride ion. And it's going to have a negative charge, so it's going to become an anion. So in this case, sodium, when combines back with chlorine in nature, sodium will donate an electron to chlorine that it has extra. And chlorine will accept that electron and become negative charge. So every time that an element accepts an electron, it becomes negative charge, and since the other one loses the negative charge, it becomes positive. It's like when you give a gift to someone. If you donate something to someone, you become positively charged. Not that, in this case, don't think, well, it depends, I guess. If the person only accepts and never gives, that makes it negative. But don't think like if you accept a gift from someone who loves you, that makes you negative. No, that's different. But in this case, to illustrate, basically, when an element donates an electron, becomes positively charged, and when another element accepts the electron, becomes negatively charged. So one becomes an ion and the other one the cation. So then it will make it easier for the one that has almost complete the octet rule to get the electron or the electrons from another element that it has very few electrons in its last shell. I always give this analogy. It's two siblings. One is older than the other one. And then they're collecting baseball cards. The older sibling may have like 6 cards, and the youngest has the 2 cards that form the actual 8 different card set, right? Then, what do you think is easier? And this is kind of a myth, but in sibling relationship for the most part. But what will be much easier? For the youngest sibling to give the 2 cards, the 2 rare cards that the oldest sibling needs to complete the set, or for the youngest sibling to receive the 6 set of cards, or the 6 cards, sorry, to the youngest who has only 2 to complete the 8. What is much easier? To what?
Receive as the youngest.
That's in real life. That's always happening because the mom, your younger brother, your younger sister wants the cards, and then since you're the oldest, you know what it is to be the oldest. You always have to give no matter what, right? But what is easy, to give 6 cards away or to give 2? To give the 2. So actually that happens in chemistry. So there is no unfairness here. So that's an ionic bond. So then in this case, the youngest will give the 2 cards to the oldest, and then the oldest complete the set. And the youngest become a cation, the oldest will be an anion. But again, that doesn't happen, rarely happens. It's the other way around. But then, that's the ionic bond. Now, we have other type of bonding that is called covalent. And in covalent, you share electrons. So there is a physical and chemical bonding between these 2 atoms, because they have to get close by physically in order to share these electrons. So this is covalent. And then in covalent, we can have polar and non-polar covalent bonds. And then we can share different number of electrons. We can share 1 pair, in this case will be single covalent. If you share 2 pairs, it will be double covalent, triple covalent bonds. So when you have equal sharing of electrons between the atoms, like for instance in molecular oxygen or O2, this will be non-polar. So in this case, the electrons spend the same amount of time between the 2 oxygen molecules. And that makes it to be stable and do not combine with others. Now, in the case of, and this is just for the elements, okay? But we will see later on how this can form water when it forms a compound. But then with polar covalent bonds, there is an unequal sharing of electrons. That creates a partial electrical charge. So, in this case will be a compound, which will be water. When you combine two hydrogens with one oxygen, because oxygen is larger than hydrogen, and because it has, of course, more protons in its nucleus than hydrogen, which only has one, the electrons tend to go more towards the side of oxygen, and then the oxygen will have a negative charge while the hydrogen has a positive charge. And that helps to combine different molecules of water and have that different lattice chemical structure that forms water. So, an example would be custody, children. If they will be, of course, a week of 8 days, and the children in a divorced couple will spend 4 days with each parent, in that case will be a non-polar because it's equal sharing. It's 7 days, 3 days and a half. Let's make it real. 3 days and a half with mom, 3 days and a half with dad. That case is non-polar. Now, let's say that the children spend the weekdays with the mom and the weekends with the dad. In this case, it's unequal sharing, so that's a polar covalent bond. That makes sense? And it's sharing children, because they have children together, okay? So then the difference between this is that in ionic bonds, you have charged ions, and in covalent bonds, you have sharing of electrons, and you have partial polarity created only when you have a polar covalent bond. And then that polarity is what makes these two behave differently. Like in the case of these cations that are formed, then they can transfer electrical current in the plasma membrane of excitable cells like neurons and nerve cells, and muscle cells. So here we have the example of sodium chloride. So this is these usual charges that they got after. So this is sodium and this is chloride. So when they separate, this one will receive an electron from this sodium, and then this one will become negatively charged, the chloride, while this one will become positively charged. So I already mentioned to you about these covalent bonds. So if you have single covalent bond, you only share one pair of electrons, 2 pairs, double, 3 pairs, a triple bond. That when you have more sharing of electrons, these bonds become stronger. So a triple covalent bond is harder to separate than a single covalent bond. And then we already saw the classification according to electron sharing. So then this is the example. So here we have 2 hydrogen molecules. They share this single pair of electron. They form H2. And they share it equally. So this will be polar or non-polar. Non-polar. And then looking here. So here again we have the non-polar. So this is like how you make a little cartoon about this covalent bond between hydrogen molecules. But then here is water. So water is 2 hydrogen molecules combining with an oxygen. They share this pair of electrons. And then these become negatively charged because the electrons tend to pull more towards the side of of oxygen because it has a larger nucleus. It has more protons. And this one, since it only has 1 protons, well, it becomes positively charged. So this is polar versus nonpolar. Okay, so we will stop in here. Any questions?